It is good. I'm standing here today. I actually took my shoes off here behind the pulpit, and I did that for a very particular reason. In the last 2 or 3 Sundays, I have preached in churches with really big pulpits. I was in St. Paul's Cathedral in London on the first Sunday after Easter, in the biggest pulpit you have ever seen in your entire life. It was so huge and so tall that I could not even see the eyes of the people who were below me. And then a Sunday after that, I was on an airplane, and the next Sunday, I was in St. Paul, Minnesota, at House of Hope Presbyterian Church, and their pulpit might not have been as big as that at St. Paul's in London, but it was almost as high. And so I was floating literally above the congregation. And so here I am with you, and I feel surprisingly grounded. I feel a little like we're in a living room together, and I just happen to be standing behind this table. So I feel the earth under my feet, and that is good. And that's what I want to talk about today, that earth under my feet, under our feet, the earth that we depend upon, the earth that is our mother. Those big old churches I was preaching at in the last couple weeks brought forth very formal sermons, written down on page after page where I didn't want to miss a single word. But for some reason today my heart has been calling forth more of a sort of teaching or reflection. My notes are much more scattered and less typed out and formalized. Being here today is just 2 days after Earth Day, and my friends, those ones around the corner at the UCC, called me a few weeks ago, and they asked me if I would do them a favor. And I said, well, what's that? And they said, are you preaching anywhere on April 24th? And I said, yes, I am. As a matter of fact, I'm preaching in your hometown, preaching in Cleveland. And they said, well, we want to do something special for Earth Day throughout the UCC. And I said, what's that? They said, we want to call this Keep It in the Ground Sunday, pointing people's attention towards the idea that we should be looking at new sources of energy, ones that we don't draw forth from the ground, but ones that come through our waterways and from the sky. And so, can you preach about the ground? Well, since I just wrote a book called Grounded, I said, I think I might be able to pull that one off. And I looked at the text, and there they were. Behold, there is a new heaven and a new earth. For the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. Oh, wait a minute, I thought. That's not very good. And right in the center of my soul arose something that I have always felt about the book of Revelation. Yuck. Indeed, a lot of commentators through the history of the book of Revelation have pointed out the problems associated with this last book in the Christian New Testament. Because it is so problematic for such a long period of time, there are people who refuse to preach on it. The Eastern Orthodox Church never uses the book of Revelation in its divine worship or in Sunday services. Our ancient ancestors, the Christians who put together the New Testament, had this as the very last book that was accepted in the canon. They had a huge fight about it, and it wasn't even accepted as legitimate until the year 419. Martin Luther thought it was the worst book in the Bible and should be taken out. And it's the only book in the entirety of the New Testament that John Calvin did not write a commentary on. That is a pretty sad history for a book in the Bible, to have everything from the ancient church to the Eastern Orthodox patriarchs to Martin Luther and John Calvin doubt that you should be there. Contemporary critics have cited that it is a sanction for divine violence and is dangerous. And its main criticism, the main thing that people today say about this book, is that the book of Revelation's emphasis on a new world seems to give license to those of us who are here now to destroy this world. Indeed, Revelation seems to cultivate a kind of disrespect for the earth. I spent a few years of my life in very conservative, evangelical, almost what you would call fundamentalist churches when I was a teenager, and I actually heard sermons preached on this. I heard a pastor one time say from a pulpit that we should not work for nuclear disarmament because it didn't matter if the earth was blown up by a nuclear bomb, because the earth was going to blow up in the end anyway. And then later on, I would hear people in that same tradition, friends, or read things that were written online or in books, say that we shouldn't pay attention to climate change because a warming earth is only a sign of what God intends to do anyway. And that is destroy this earth and replace it with a new one. We sometimes call the book of Revelation the apocalypse, referring to the end of time, this sort of unveiling of what God's actions are going to be as the world falls to its final moments, and there will be something new that emerges. And as I've thought about it in relationship to my friends from the UCC, Keep It in the Ground, and today being Earth Day, and my own work that I have done in the last couple years as I wrote Grounded and fell more deeply in love with the world, I've thought maybe Revelation isn't nearly as bad as I thought it had been. Maybe it's not about an apocalypse, about the end times when the earth will be destroyed, but maybe it is more aptly called a cosmology. Does the book of Revelation present to us a theory of the universe? Not a scientific theory, like a physical cosmology, but instead a spiritual or theological cosmology. There's a clue in the text that this is a cosmology. There's a little odd verse where it says, "Behold, I saw a new heaven and a new earth," and then this line, "The first earth had passed away and the sea was no more." What a weird thing to say. Why does John of Patmos say the sea was no more? Well, in the world in which John lived, they had a cosmology, a theory of the structure of the universe. It was actually scientific, not just theological or spiritual. And the cosmology was like this. There was heaven above, and there was hell, the underworld below. In between was the earth. This is what they called the three-tiered universe. And the earth was separated from the heavens by, of course, what we could see, the sky. But then, built out of a verse in Genesis, this verse, Genesis 1, 6 through 8, "Let there be an expanse between the waters to separate water from water." And God called the expanse sky. Our ancient ancestors thought there was heaven, earth, this sky right above the earth. But then there was something else between the furthest part of heaven where God lived and the sky that we see. They literally thought that the whole of the universe was surrounded by water. That water was what was between God and the sky here on earth and the waters around our lands. And so, in a sense, we live in a universe where there's God, water, sky, earth, hell. This was the structure of the universe. This was science, ancient science. So John says, "The sea shall be no more." I think what he's saying is that that water that protected us from the divine presence, the God in far-off heaven, that water that was right outside the sky, that water was going to collapse, and that heaven was going to move down here to earth. Indeed, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first earth had passed away, and the sea, those waters, were no more. That is stripped away. And a new Jerusalem came down from heaven, from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And see, the home of God is now among mortals. God will dwell with them as their God, and they will be God's people. This is a cosmology. John is talking about the structure of the universe, that there is going to be a reunion of all creation, that protective layer of water that kept God away from us is going to disappear, and the city of peace shall be here on earth. The boundary between heaven and earth will dissolve. When we understand this about the book of Revelation, we understand that it is not about destruction. Instead, it is about a relocation, a reunion of God and us, and perhaps even a resurrection that was what was God's intention all along, that this divine presence would live here with us, that God would dwell on earth. This fancy word, cosmologies are theories of the universe, tell us things about the way that we are supposed to live, not the way we're going to die or the way that the earth is destroyed. If we take Revelation as a cosmology about the structure and the nature, the deepest meaning of the universe, it begins to point us towards two important things that help us live better. The first of those things is that somewhere, somehow in the past, and the book of Genesis actually does tell us a story about this, that there was a division, that a divide occurred, a separation that would keep us away from God and keeps God's sanctity and holiness away from us. And this separation, this division, would be the source of violence, the source of our destructive natures, the source of our sin, evil, and domination. But Revelation does not stop there. Revelation says that separation is going to go away. The division will be overcome. There will be healing of the breach. The sea will be no more. And the healing of that breach signals an entirely new reality, that everything that was apart will be joined, a new heaven and a new earth here. If this is indeed the case, that the deepest cosmology of the universe is this union, this joining of heaven and earth, it means what we do here is not irrelevant. But instead, somehow this earth is going to be enfolded into a new reality of love, the new reality of God's divine presence. A couple weeks ago, I was preaching on the wounds of Jesus, that famous story when Jesus appears to the disciples in the upper room. Thomas is not there. Thomas says to his friends, "I can't believe that Jesus showed up here. What are you talking about? I'm not going to believe that Jesus is alive until I see the wounds on his hands." And so a few days later, they're gathered again in the same room, and Thomas is there. And Jesus shows up again, and there he is with his wounded hands, his wounds still visible. I don't know if I had ever considered that the story of Jesus' wounds with Thomas and this story about a new heaven and a new earth are connected, but I think they are. When Jesus overcame the breach of death, the ultimate division that we all fear and we all resist and we all fight, when Jesus overcame that breach and he returned, his friends recognized him. And oddly enough, the wounds were visible. What we had done to Jesus in our violence on the cross was still visible. Even though Jesus had a new body and was living in a new reality and had been enfolded in the love of God and gifted that love of God to his friends. It made me wonder, is this what Revelation is pointing us toward? When that new heaven and that new earth appears, will the wounds that we have inflicted upon the earth still be visible? In the same way that the wounds of Jesus are visible through all of time. Now, what we are told is those wounds will no longer make us cry, and those wounds will no longer signal death. So those wounds are somehow going to be wrapped up into the mysterious purpose of the one who is bringing the universe back into unity. But the wounds, I think, will still be there. Heaven and earth are one. And the earth will still be recognizable as the earth that we know. Her wounds will remain. This is the deepest and darkest confession I have ever made in a public sermon. When I was 20 years old, my most amazing sort of young love affair was with a fellow who now is, of course, my age, and we're not 20 anymore. And he has grown up to be one of America's biggest climate change deniers. God saved me. A few weeks ago, on his very famous conservative blog, he published an article called "Earth First, We'll Drill All the Other Planets Later." And I thought about the wounds of Christ. And I thought about this beautiful earth. And I thought about how we're going to live with these wounds for all eternity. Wouldn't it be better if when this earth passes into its final union with God and with love, that it was just a little less wounded? A little less inflicted with human violence, a little more lovely. Maybe we should keep just a bit more of it in the ground, that holy ground, the body of Jesus, the earth. Cosmology is a serious thing. Cosmology is a field of philosophy and science. A lot of people are studying and getting PhDs in cosmology today. It's actually an incredibly popular college major. It's related mostly to quantum physics, and it is way above my pay grade. But it is also fascinating. Neil deGrasse Tyson, Stephen Hawking, these prophets of a new way of seeing the universe intrigue even the most theological and Christian imagination to think about God's creation and God's recreation and the reunion of heaven and earth in all new ways. Cosmology is about nature and meaning. It is about where we started and how we shall end. I asked a friend of mine who is a philosopher and a physicist, 2 PhDs, some questions about cosmology. And I said to him, I don't really understand what it is what quantum physics is actually looking for. And he said to me, we're looking for the quantum horizon. And I said, what the heck is the quantum horizon? And he said, you know, when we send those telescopes out, when we're looking at the skies through Hubble, we're looking for the edge. The edge? The edge of what? He said, we're looking back in time to see the beginning. 14 billion years ago, we're looking for the beginning. That's at the edge. And I stopped and I said, wow. And he said, but you know what else we're looking for? We're looking for the end. And I said, you're kidding. And he said, no. He said, that's what the quantum horizon is. The beginning and the end. And that is what quantum physics is searching for. And the one who was seated on the throne said, see, I am making all things new. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. Amen.